There was a season in Israel's history when the light seemed to dim from the inside out. Not because the sun stopped shining, but because the people slowly stopped remembering the one who gave them light in the first place. After Solomon's death, the kingdom fractured, and with that fracture came something even more dangerous than political division: spiritual amnesia. In the years that followed, a new power rose in Samaria. King Ahab, a ruler remembered not for wisdom or courage, but for compromise, weakness, and a hunger to please the wrong voices. And beside him stood Jezebel, his queen, not merely ruthless but calculated, an architect of fear who understood that if you silence the prophets, you can rewrite the nation's conscience. The land that was meant to echo with worship became a hunting ground.
And its servants of God were chased, cornered, and eliminated, and their blood quietly stained the soil of a nation that once trembled at the voice of Yahweh. What happens to a people when the name of God becomes unfamiliar on their own lips? The answer was visible everywhere. Altars of stone and wood multiplied, incense rose to foreign gods, and Israel began kneeling to what could not speak, could not see, could not save. Yet the most unsettling part is this: the drift did not look dramatic at first. It looked normal. It looked like culture. It looked like progress. But underneath it, something sacred was collapsing. And still, God had not abandoned his people. While the palace in Samaria grew louder with idols and vanity, something was being prepared far from the spotlight, deep in the hills of Gilead, in a place many would have dismissed as barren and forgotten. From that rugged land emerged a man who did not arrive with armies or titles, but with a presence that felt like judgment itself had learned to walk. His name was Elijah, and even the sound of it carried a verdict. My God is Yahweh. He was not a polished priest, not a royal advisor, not a trained warrior, but a solitary figure shaped by silence, hardened by wilderness, and marked by a strange fire that seemed to burn behind his eyes. Yet this story is not only about a prophet who would someday shut the skies and call down flame from heaven. It is also about the fragile human standing inside that prophetic mantle. Because the greatest battles in Elijah's life would not always be fought in public, and the deepest wounds would not always come from Jezebel's threats, but from the loneliness, doubt, and burden that can crush even the most faithful when no one is watching. In a nation sinking into darkness, God's answer did not come from a throne, it came from the wilderness. And when Elijah finally steps forward, Israel will learn that the living God is not silent. He is simply patient until the moment judgment and mercy are ready to speak. When the moment finally came, Elijah did not announce himself with banners or messengers. He descended from the rugged hills of Gilead and walked straight toward Samaria, the very heart of Israel's corruption, as though an unseen authority cleared the path before him. Guards stationed at the palace gates watched the wild figure approach, clothed in camel hair, weathered by the wilderness, his eyes carrying a fire that did not belong to this world. No command was given, yet no hand reached for a weapon. Without a word, they stepped aside, as if the air itself recognized who was passing through. Elijah moved through the palace corridors without escort, without permission, and without fear. Servants retreated with every step he took, sensing that this was not merely a man intruding upon royal space, but a messenger carrying something far heavier than words. The pillars that had witnessed the rise and fall of kings now stood silent as Elijah entered the throne room, where Ahab sat surrounded by counselors, idols, and the quiet arrogance of power. Before the king could even demand his name, the prophet spoke. As surely as the Lord lives, the God of Israel, whom I serve, Elijah declared, his voice steady and unshaken, there will be neither dew nor rain in these years, except at my word. The sentence hung in the air like a verdict written across the heavens. No thunder followed, no sign appeared, yet something had shifted. A
A silence fell, heavy and unnatural, as if creation itself had paused to listen. Elijah did not wait for a reply. He turned and left the way he had come, disappearing as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving behind a king frozen on his throne. And then it began. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, the sky over Israel started to change. Clouds thinned, then vanished. The familiar morning dew failed to settle on the fields. The air grew dry and brittle, and the heavens above seemed to close like a sealed door. What had once been a land sustained by unseen mercy now faced the weight of judgment. Day after day, the sun burned hotter, wells began to recede, and the soil cracked beneath the feet of those who had forgotten the God who once watered it. As Israel entered its long descent into drought, Elijah was already gone. The voice that had shut the skies now spoke to him again, directing him away from the palace and into hiding. "Leave this place," the Lord said. "Go eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, east of the Jordan." There, far from thrones and temples, Elijah would drink from the stream, and ravens, creatures considered unclean, would be commanded to feed him. It was a strange contrast. While a nation suffered beneath an open judgment, the prophet himself was led into silence once more, into a hidden valley carved between dry hills. This was not retreat born of fear, but obedience shaped by trust. The same God who closed the heavens would now sustain his servant in secrecy. And as Elijah turned eastward, leaving the withering land behind him, Israel would soon learn that the absence of rain was not the absence of God, but the echo of a warning long ignored. Hidden between the barren hills east of the Jordan, the brook Cherith flowed like a thin, fragile line of life carved into an otherwise lifeless landscape. It was here, far from the eyes of kings and the cries of a suffering nation, that Elijah disappeared from history's main stage. The prophet who had sealed the heavens now lived in silence, surrounded by stone, dust, and the steady sound of moving water. This place was not chosen for comfort, but for concealment, a sanctuary where obedience would be tested, away from applause and danger alike. Each morning and each evening, as the desert air shifted with the rising and setting of the sun, an unexpected miracle unfolded. Ravens appeared from the distant sky, their black wings cutting across the pale horizon, carrying bread and meat in their beaks. They descended without fear, placed the food before the prophet, and vanished once more into the open heavens. These were creatures declared unclean by the law, despised and avoided by men, yet they became the chosen instruments of provision. It was a quiet reminder that the God who commands the skies is not bound by human categories of purity or expectation. While Elijah ate in solitude and drank from the brook, the rest of Israel withered. Across the land, wells sank lower each day. Fields cracked beneath the relentless sun, and animals collapsed where grass once grew. The drought spread like a silent curse, touching every household without discrimination. In Samaria, Ahab's patience turned to rage. Orders were shouted, messengers dispatched, and soldiers sent across the land to hunt the prophet whose words had brought the skies to a standstill. Yet no report ever reached the palace. Elijah remained hidden, known only to the ravens and the slow-moving water at his feet. Time passed, not in dramatic moments, but in long, unbroken stretches of waiting. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. Then Elijah noticed a change. Stones that had once been submerged began to rise from the water like small islands. The steady current weakened, its voice reduced to a faint murmur. The drought he had proclaimed over the land was now reaching him personally. The brook that had sustained him was slowly surrendering to the same judgment gripping the nation. When the water finally disappeared, leaving only damp earth between the rocks, Elijah did not panic. nor did he speak in protest. He waited. Silence, once again, became the test, and in that stillness, the voice of God returned with a new command, sending him westward to Zarephath in Sidon, a foreign land, and the very homeland of Jezebel. It was a dangerous direction, one that defied instinct and reason. Yet Elijah rose without hesitation. The God who had fed him through ravens would now lead him into enemy territory, proving once more that faith does not cling to safety, but listens for the next word spoken from heaven. When Elijah reached the gates of Zarephath, the land bore the same scars as Israel: cracked earth, empty fields, and faces worn thin by hunger and loss. This was Sidon, foreign soil, the homeland of Jezebel herself, a place where the name of Yahweh was scarcely spoken and where survival had become a daily struggle. It was here, in enemy territory, that God had said a widow would provide for his prophet. What Elijah found instead was a woman gathering dry sticks, her movements slow, her strength nearly spent, preparing not a future, but an ending. Elijah approached her with the quiet authority that had followed him since Gilead and asked for a little water. She turned without protest, but before she could leave, he asked for bread as well. At that moment, her resolve broke. With a voice trembling between honesty and despair, she confessed that she had nothing left but a handful of flour and a little oil, just enough for one final meal for herself and her son before death would take them both. The drought had not only emptied her jars, it had drained her hope. Yet Elijah did not withdraw his request. Instead, he spoke words that cut against reason itself. He told her not to be afraid, to prepare a small cake for him first, and then to make food for herself and her child. He promised, not in his own name, but in the name of the God of Israel, that the jar of flour would not be used up and the oil would not run dry until the day the rain returned. In that moment, the widow faced a decision more profound than hunger. She could cling to what little she had left, or she could trust the word of a stranger whose eyes carried a depth she could not explain. She chose to believe. She returned home, lit the fire, poured the flour, and watched as the oil flowed. And when she looked again into the jar, it was not empty. Day after day, the miracle repeated itself, quiet and unannounced, sustaining 3 lives in the midst of widespread death. In a land ruled by idols, true provision flowed from obedience and trust, not from altars of stone. But the story did not end there. Suddenly, the widow's son fell ill, his breath growing weaker until it vanished altogether. Grief shattered the fragile peace of her home, and she turned on Elijah in anguish, accusing him of bringing judgment rather than salvation. Without defense or argument, Elijah took the lifeless child in his arms and carried him to the upper room. There, alone, he cried out to heaven and stretched himself over the boy, pleading for life to return. Silence followed, heavy and unrelenting, until breath came again. Elijah carried the living child back to his mother, and in that moment, something deeper than survival was restored. With tears streaming down her face, the widow confessed that she now truly knew he was a man of God, and that the word of the Lord spoken through him was true. In Zarephath, a place marked by foreign gods and fading hope, faith had been reborn, and the miracle that would not end had revealed the living God to a broken heart. As the drought tightened its grip around Israel, reducing fertile valleys to dust and leaving even the wealthy desperate for survival, it became easy to believe that faith had vanished entirely from the land. Yet beneath the surface of national collapse, God had preserved a hidden remnant, people who refused to bow even when doing so would have spared their lives. One of them stood in the most unlikely place of all, inside the palace of King Ahab. His name was Obadiah, Obadiah served as Ahab's steward, a position that required constant proximity to cruelty, idolatry, and deception. Yet beneath his outward loyalty to the throne, he harbored a dangerous secret. When Jezebel ordered the slaughter of the Lord's prophets, Obadiah acted quietly and decisively. He hid 100 of them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and at great personal risk supplied them with bread and water day after day.
If discovered, his loyalty to God would have cost him everything, including his life. But faith, when genuine, often survives in silence rather than spectacle. One morning, as the king ordered Obadiah to search the land for any remaining grass or springs that might save the royal livestock, the steward set out across the scorched countryside. It was there, on a desolate road lined with cracked earth and lifeless trees, that Obadiah saw him. Elijah stood before him, unchanged, unmoved by time or drought, his presence as commanding as it had been years earlier. Overcome with fear and reverence, Obadiah fell to the ground and addressed him as his Lord. When Elijah instructed him to return and tell Ahab that he had come back, terror seized Obadiah's heart. He knew the king's rage too well. If Elijah vanished again, as he had before, Obadiah would be executed without question. In desperation, he poured out his story, reminding the prophet of his faithfulness, his hidden sacrifices, and the lives he had risked to protect God's servants. Elijah listened without interruption, then answered with a solemn oath. As surely as the Lord of hosts lives, he would stand before Ahab that very day. With trembling resolve, Obadiah obeyed. The message spread quickly through the palace. Elijah had returned. The prophet who had sealed the heavens shut was no longer hidden. When Ahab and Elijah finally met, the tension between them crackled like dry air before a storm. Elijah wasted no time. He challenged the king to gather all Israel at Mount Carmel, along with the prophets of Baal and Asherah who ate at Jezebel's table. There, before the eyes of the nation, the question would be settled once and for all. Who truly ruled Israel? The summons had been issued, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake heaven and earth alike. Mount Carmel rose above the land like a silent witness, its slopes soon crowded with thousands who had climbed from every corner of Israel. Farmers, soldiers, elders, and priests gathered beneath a sky that had refused them rain for 3 relentless years. At the center of the mountain stood an unsettling contrast. On one side, hundreds of prophets of Baal and Asherah, robed in color, adorned with symbols of their gods, confident in their numbers and tradition. On the other side stood Elijah alone, clothed in a worn mantle, carrying no weapon, no army, and no protection beyond the word he had received. Before the contest began, Elijah turned to the people and asked a question that cut deeper than any blade. How long would they waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord was God, they were to follow him. If Baal was God, then they should follow Baal. The crowd answered him with silence. Their hesitation revealed the true depth of the drought, not only in the land, but in their hearts. The prophets of Baal were given the first opportunity. They prepared their sacrifice and called upon their God from morning until noon, leaping, shouting, and pleading for fire to fall. Their voices echoed across the mountain, growing louder and more desperate with every unanswered cry. Yet the sky remained unmoved. There was no voice, no sign, and no response. As the hours passed, Elijah began to mock them, suggesting that Baal might be distracted, wandering, or asleep. Driven to frenzy, the prophets cut themselves with knives, letting blood flow freely in an attempt to provoke their god. Still, nothing happened. The silence became undeniable. When Elijah's turn came, he rebuilt the broken altar of the Lord using 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel, restoring what had been neglected and forgotten. He arranged the wood, placed the sacrifice upon it, and then ordered something unthinkable in the midst of a drought.
Water was poured over the altar once, then twice, and a third time, until the trench surrounding it overflowed. There would be no doubt, no illusion, and no room for manipulation. Elijah lifted his eyes toward heaven and prayed, not with spectacle, but with clarity and submission. He asked that God reveal himself, not for his own honor, but so the people would know that the Lord alone was God, and that their hearts were being turned back to him. For a brief moment, silence returned. Then fire fell from heaven with overwhelming force, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water itself, leaving nothing but ash and awe in its wake. The people collapsed to the ground, crying out in unison, "The Lord, He is God!" The powerlessness of Baal was exposed, and judgment swiftly followed as the false prophets were seized and removed from the land. Yet Elijah sensed something more. As he climbed the mountain to pray again, he heard what no one else could hear, the distant sound of rain. He prayed with relentless persistence until a small cloud rose from the sea, no larger than a man's hand. Within moments, the sky darkened, the wind surged, and rain poured down upon the land. Strengthened by the hand of the Lord, Elijah ran ahead of Ahab's chariot through the storm. But as the rain fell, another storm was already forming. In the palace at Jezreel, Jezebel burned with fury, and a vow of death was on its way. The rain had returned, the fire had fallen, and the nation had witnessed the undeniable power of the living God. Yet, almost immediately, the story took a turn no one expected. When Jezebel's message reached Elijah, a message sworn in blood and vengeance, fear seized him with a force deeper than any enemy army had ever managed. The prophet, who had stood unflinching before hundreds on Mount Carmel, now found himself running, not from Baal, not from kings, but from the threat of a single, determined voice. Without pausing to seek God's counsel, Elijah fled southward, leaving behind the people who had only just begun to turn back to the Lord. He ran as though death itself pursued him, crossing fields and hills until strength drained from his body and hope drained from his spirit. At last, alone in the wilderness, Elijah collapsed beneath the thin shade of a broom tree. There, stripped of adrenaline and purpose, the weight of years fell upon him all at once. With tears he could no longer contain, he cried out to heaven, asking not for victory, but for release. "Enough, Lord," he pleaded. "Take my life, for I am no better than those who came before me." It was the voice of a man who had reached the edge of endurance, broken not only by fear but by loneliness and disappointment that nothing truly seemed to change. In that moment of complete collapse, God did not answer with rebuke or judgment. Instead, compassion arrived quietly. A gentle touch awakened Elijah from his despair, and beside him stood an angel, speaking with calm authority. He was told to rise and eat. Before him lay bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water, simple provision for a shattered soul. Elijah ate, yet the heaviness within him remained, and he lay down again, hoping sleep might numb the pain he could not escape. Once more the angel returned, touching him again and urging him to eat, explaining that the journey ahead was longer than he knew. These words marked a turning point. Elijah, who had run in fear, was now being prepared for an encounter far deeper than public triumph. The God who had sent fire from heaven now met his servant in weakness, tending to his physical and emotional exhaustion before speaking again. Beneath that broom tree, a truth emerged that would shape the rest of Elijah's story. God does not abandon his servants when they break. He does not discard those who are weary. Instead, he strengthens them where they have fallen, proving that divine power often begins where human strength ends. And as Elijah rose from the dust, nourished and restored, his journey was far from over. Sustained by the strength he had received beneath the broom tree, Elijah journeyed deep into the wilderness, traveling 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. This was no ordinary destination. Centuries earlier, this was the same sacred ground where Moses had stood before the divine presence and received the law.
Now Elijah arrived not as a triumphant prophet, but as a weary man seeking refuge. He entered a dark cave carved into the mountain, hiding from the wind and from his own unanswered questions. It was there, in the heavy silence, that the voice of God broke through and asked a question that pierced straight to the heart. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" From the depths of exhaustion and disappointment, Elijah answered with honesty rather than courage. He spoke of his zeal, of Israel's betrayal, of altars torn down and prophets slain. He confessed what he had carried for years, the crushing belief that he alone remained faithful and that his life was now hunted for it. His words revealed not rebellion, but isolation, a soul worn thin by standing alone for too long. God did not correct him immediately. Instead, he invited Elijah to step out of the cave and stand upon the mountain, because the Lord himself was about to pass by. Suddenly, a violent wind tore through the landscape, splitting rocks and shaking the mountain's foundations. Yet the Lord was not in the wind. Then came an earthquake, powerful enough to unsettle the ground beneath Elijah's feet, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After that, fire blazed across the mountain, fierce and consuming. But once again, the Lord was not in the fire. Then everything grew still. In the quiet that followed, a gentle whisper emerged, so soft it barely disturbed the air. When Elijah heard it, he knew. He covered his face with his cloak and stepped forward, standing at the entrance of the cave. In that whisper was the same voice that had commanded fire and rain, now speaking with patience and compassion. God asked the question again, not to accuse, but to heal. Elijah repeated his complaint, but this time God responded with direction rather than judgment. He gave Elijah new assignments, instructing him to anoint Hazael king over Syria, Jehu king over Israel, and Elisha as his successor. Then came the revelation that shattered Elijah's loneliness. God had preserved 7,000 in Israel, a hidden remnant who had not bowed their knees to Baal. Elijah had never been alone. Faith had been quietly waiting in the shadows. Renewed in purpose, Elijah descended from Horeb and soon encountered Elisha, a farmer plowing the fields with 12 yoke of oxen. Without ceremony, Elijah placed his cloak upon him, signaling a divine calling. Elisha understood immediately. He burned his plow, sacrificed his oxen, and left everything behind to follow the prophet. What began in a whisper on Horeb now moved forward with living obedience, carrying the fire of God into the next generation. Time passed, and although fire had fallen from heaven and rain had returned to the land, the hearts of Israel's rulers did not truly change. King Ahab continued to reign, surrounded by luxury, yet inwardly ruled by desire. Near his palace lay a modest vineyard belonging to a righteous man named Naboth, land inherited through generations and guarded by sacred law. What Ahab could not lawfully possess, he began to crave. When Naboth refused to sell what God had entrusted to him, Ahab withdrew like a wounded child, sulking in bitterness rather than repenting. Jezebel, unmoved by conscience, acted swiftly. Through forged letters and false witnesses, Naboth was accused, dragged beyond the city, and executed without defense. His blood soaked the ground that Ahab would soon claim as his own. Yet the moment the king stepped into the stolen vineyard, Elijah appeared again, his presence heavy with judgment. The prophet declared that in the very place where dogs licked Naboth's blood, they would lick Ahab's as well, and that Jezebel herself would be devoured by dogs beside the walls of Jezreel. For once, Ahab did not protest. He tore his garments, fasted, and humbled himself, and God delayed the judgment until the next generation.
But prophecy does not forget. Years later, Ahab died exactly as foretold, struck by a stray arrow in battle, bleeding quietly in his chariot as the sun set. Dogs licked his blood when the chariot was washed, sealing Elijah's words with grim precision. His son Ahaziah followed him, repeating the same corruption. When injured, he sought counsel not from the God of Israel, but from Baal-zebub. Elijah intercepted his messengers and pronounced his fate. 2 captains with 50 soldiers each were consumed by fire from heaven, until a third came in humility. Elijah went with him and declared the judgment face to face. Ahaziah died, just as spoken.
Then came Elijah's final journey.
From Gilgal to Bethel, from Jericho to the Jordan, he walked with Elisha at his side. When the waters of the Jordan parted beneath Elijah's cloak, history echoed once more. And then, without warning, the heavens opened. A whirlwind descended, and a chariot of fire with horses of flame carried Elijah upward beyond death itself. His cloak fell to the earth, resting in Elisha's trembling hands, a sign that the spirit had not vanished, only passed on. Through Elisha, the judgment continued. Jehu was anointed, the house of Ahab was destroyed, and Jezebel was thrown from her window, her body consumed by dogs exactly as foretold. Every word spoken by the prophet was fulfilled. Yet the story did not end in judgment alone. Centuries later, the prophet Malachi spoke of Elijah still to come, a voice before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Elijah's story endures because it speaks beyond its time.
It reminds us that even the strongest servants grow weary, that God meets us in whispers as well as fire, and that faith is sustained not by perfection, but by obedience. If this story has spoken to you, share it with someone who may feel alone. And stay with us as we continue uncovering the ancient stories that still speak today.